Good evening, committee members. My name is Jeff Pengelly. I'm the Assistant Director of Community Development. This report is regarding the Oxnard Permit Simplicity Act, the implementation report. A little background on the Oxnard Permit Simplicity Act. As you all are aware, Measure F was approved by the voters in the past election, November 3rd, 2020, and it has subsequently been codified as Chapter 26 of the Oxnard City Code. This was done via ordinance number 2991, and it's referred to as the Oxnard Permit Simplicity Act, also referred to as the Act in this presentation. This program creates what is called a self-certification permit streamlining program. And again, it's called the Permit Simplicity Certified Program in the Act itself. We refer to that as the program as well in this presentation. Project applicants for this program, they have to be pre-qualified and they have to receive what's called Permit Simplicity training, and that is facilitated by city staff. They need to receive that training and meet certain pre-qualification requirements in order to apply. Pre-qualification, it does include state licensure as an architect, engineer, contractor, etc. And there's also a requirement to be certified by an outside organization, and there's some additional options for that stipulated in the Act itself. There's also provisions for landscape architects and certified interior designers. Those are all specified in the Act itself. The key is they're state licensed and they are acting within the boundaries of their state license. The project applicants also must show evidence of $1 million of professional liability insurance. And the Act stipulates that this insurance is to be held for 5 years after a project they have submitted to the city is permitted, and once the project is built and completed, they have to retain that insurance for 5 years. Now, when I mentioned pre-qualifications, we talked about them being a licensed architect or licensed engineer, and I mentioned that they could also be a licensed architect or a certified interior designer. I wanted to clarify, the Act by no means implies that someone can act outside of their authority of the licensure they have. An example would be a landscape architect would not be permitted to prepare plans for a multi-story apartment building. I've attached a building design authority fact sheet with this agenda item as well for reference, but I wanted to be clear, the Act in no way implies that anyone can act outside of their licensure. The applicants also must provide what's called a structural peer review for projects that require a civil engineer. Most commonly, projects involving structural engineering will have structural calculations and plans prepared by a licensed civil engineer. This Act requires that they have, before they submit those plans, that they have a third-party licensed structural engineer provide what's called a structural peer review. So essentially a third-party highly qualified licensed structural engineer will review those aspects of the plans before they are submitted to the city. The city will develop a list of qualified licensed structural engineers for project applicants to choose from. There is also a requirement that pre-approvals are required prior to a project being accepted into the program. An example of pre-approvals could be planning permits and entitlements for a larger project, approved civil infrastructure and grading plans, and approval from other city departments such as the fire department. There also may be a requirement for certain types of projects to have approvals from outside agencies. A common example of that is for a food use or a restaurant. It requires the approval of Ventura County Environmental Health. We would require that in advance of a project being accepted into the Permit Simplicity program. If for some reason a project is not accepted into the program because they've failed to comply with the requirements, they can appeal that to what's called the Building Board of Appeals. That's a new board that we're in the process of forming that would hear the applicant's appeal regarding city staff's interpretation of the Permit Simplicity Act. There's an auditing process I'll talk about a little bit more in just a moment, but if the auditing process ends up generating adverse audit results, and there's also provisions for the applicants to be suspended or revoked from the program because of adverse audit results, those actions can be appealed also to the Building Board of Appeals, but they can also be further appealed after that to the City Council. I mentioned project auditing a moment ago, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. The idea of the Simplicity Act is that a project is submitted and it's self-certified, so that we are not, the building department is not performing a plan check on that project. And the permit will be issued within 1 business day of the project meeting all the requirements and pre-approvals, and we would then issue the permit and they would enter the construction phase of the project. Once that happens, we will be auditing the projects as stipulated in the Act. An example of the auditing process or the selection process for audits that's stipulated in the Act itself, the first 4 projects from any applicant. So if there's for an example, a licensed architect submits a project to the city for the Permit Simplicity program, the first 4 projects they submit to the city will be audited automatically. Any project meeting a size threshold indicated here and indicated in the Act of 100,000 square feet would be subject to audit. And there's a few more or less common scenarios, but aside from that, a random sample of 10 to 20% is indicated in the Act itself. An audit for purposes of this discussion is effectively a building plan check. So again, that audit would take place after the permit's been issued, and any adverse audit results or code violations discovered by field inspectors would result in plan revisions being required, and ultimately, depending on the nature of the concerns discovered, it could result in work stoppage. And again, that is just highly dependent on the nature of the items that would be discovered, either through an audit or through a field inspector identifying code violations. An applicant who fails multiple audits or who fails to address field corrections in a timely manner can be subjected to suspension or revocation from the program. A few of the program implementation highlights shows that this program involves some outreach that we will be beginning in the month of June. We will be working on a comprehensive program guide. That guide will give all the details of the program in addition to linking to the ordinance itself, but more of a user guide, if you will, but with a lot of the details that users would like to know. And we also are working on developing a quick reference fact sheet. That would be for someone curious about what the program entails, not the entire program guide, but just some information that's in a more condensed form. So we'll be working on that as well. A big facet of this program is that the applicants have to go through training administered by city staff before they are qualified to submit projects. That's, as I mentioned before, called Permit Simplicity Training Program. So we're developing that, and our intention is to have the training program be video-based for convenience of the applicants, but also for the concerns during the COVID-19 pandemic. We will have a submittal checklist. There are some audit and appeals procedures. Of course, we discussed those a moment ago, but we need to have those written out and available, and that'll be a part of the program guide, but we're still developing those audit and appeals procedures. The Act itself does give a good framework for those audit and appeals procedures, at least, the boundaries and the basic framework for that. So we're developing those procedures as well. There is also required to be provided by the applicant hold harmless letters and some professional certification statements. And I referred to appeals being made to the Building Board of Appeals, so we are also in the process of creating that board. All the information I mentioned will be posted on the city website for easy access. Now, the implementation timeline is spelled out here in this table. I'll run through those here. The month of June, as I mentioned, we're looking at outreach efforts. Outreach efforts can include anything from posting to the website and perhaps using the city's public information officer as a resource to get the message out. And we're also looking at providing information to industry organizations. June 8th will be this committee. We'll be hearing this report on program implementation as a milestone date in the program rollout. June 9th through June 30th, we'll be making potentially modifications to the program implementation based on committee feedback and continuing to develop the program. The week of July 12th, we anticipate having opening the registration up for program training. And the week of July 19th, program training and final exams would occur. And that would culminate in hopefully the same day, successful applicants passing their final exams. And the applicants would then be qualified to submit projects to the city through the Permit Simplicity Act. Now, we anticipate somewhere around November or December of 2021, accepting a new round of training registrations. The Act stipulates that we are to hold at least 2 training sessions per year. So we want to implement the first training, like I said, in July, and then we think around November or December would be a good time to have additional training, the second training of the year. Depending on public demand, we could push that up earlier. So we'll just see how the program rolls out and be ready by that time frame. As I mentioned, at least 2 training sessions will be provided per year moving forward. We could always offer more should there be a public demand for that. And then in 2022, we anticipate bringing a program update to this council committee. And we will be analyzing the program during the implementation and analyzing it for the associated staffing and funding needs we may have based on the public demand for the program. As far as the financial impact, cost recovery for the program is limited to the staff time only to facilitate the Permit Simplicity training. We estimate the fee based on our currently adopted hourly rates to be somewhere in the range from $150 to $250 per applicant. We will, of course, narrow that down as we get closer to the program implementation, but that's the range that we're looking at. And then if there is a need for a project applicant to appeal either to the Building Board of Appeals or to City Council, we would utilize the existing adopted fees for similar appeals, which currently are set at $214.83 if the Building Board of Appeals is utilized and $1,921.50 if an appeal to the City Council is requested. The cost recovery, again, stipulated by the Act, is only for the facilitation of the training program. Currently, the development of the program and the rollout and what we would expect to be the implementation moving forward are being absorbed by existing city staff and potentially consultants. We intend to re-examine the staffing needs once the program has been implemented. It's going to be highly dependent on the level of public participation as to how much staff time and resources will need to be utilized to operate this program. Should additional staffing resources be necessary, we will make those resource requests in future budgets. The recommendation is that the Community Services, Public Safety, Housing, and Development Committee receive a report and provide input on the implementation of the Oxnard Permit Simplicity Act. I'm available for any questions you may have. Thank you.